Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining me for our final session of the Take Off and Estimate Software Skills course. So the fourth and final module is all about making use of the data that we've produced in our estimate. So we'll focus on how to use the build program, some of the data reports that we have in the software, and we'll also look at customizing the customer quotation. Okay, so as always, make sure you've got your question box available and send me any questions you have as we go along. You know the drill now, so let's make a start and get stuck in. So I've opened my EstimatorXpress software, so I'm looking at the dashboard, which is the opening screen of the software. And at the top of the list of recent work, I've got my training extension there, so hopefully you can see it on your screen as well. So if you single click on our Lean to Extension training takeoff, that will open up the estimate. Okay, on the left-hand side, on the navigator, you'll see that we've got all of the estimating calculators on display at the moment, and they're all part of the main estimate. Next to where it says main estimate, there's an arrow. If you click on that arrow, it will minimize all of those estimating calculators so it looks a bit cleaner. I'm going to make my navigator a bit wider actually. So you'll see from the navigator, it's showing the job we've got open at the moment. It's got the main estimate screen. That's where we can do all of our estimating, go into the estimating calculators, review what we've costed. Then we've got a build program. So that's what we're going to be looking at in a moment. We've got the output section, which can be expanded. So the outputs contains all sorts of different written documents, depending on what you have bought or subscribed to. So the customer quotation is found in the quote for main estimate. You may have access to building regs, notes, stage payments and invoicing in there as well. We have some graphical reports, and then we have data reports. So we'll have a good look around the data reports and see what's in there and how you can make use of it. So the build program and the outputs are going to be the sections that we're looking at today. Before we go into the build program, there's one setting that I would just like us to change. So on the toolbar at the top of the screen, you'll see there's a settings tab. If you click on there and then go to EstimatorXpress options, and on the left hand side, about 6 or 7 lines down, we've got the jobs section. If you click on that, and just to the right, there's a tick box that says don't export resource lines with a quantity of 0 to the build program. So if you can tick that box, don't export resource lines with a quantity of 0, and the next one down, don't export resource lines with a cost of 0. Now that all sounds very complicated. I've noticed today one of the quirks of the software is if you have used the subcontract quotations estimating calculator, whether you have used all of the different quotation types in that calculator or not, it will pull all of the data across to your build program, whereas we only want to pull across the lines on the subcontract quotations that we have put a cost next to. So if we tick those 2 boxes there, it will make sure that we don't get all the extra gumph in there. I'll show you what I mean in a moment. Okay, so if you click close and then click on the estimate screen, sorry, the estimate tab, I should say, at the top of the screen, and press the recalc job button, the software will take a moment just to do a quick recalculation, and what it's doing is applying that setting that we've just selected. So it will say the job cost hasn't changed, which is exactly what we want because we haven't changed any of the costings. What we've just done is changed a setting about the way the costs are brought into the build program. Okay, so if we now click on the build program on the navigator on the left, the build program will open up. I've been into mine already. If the first time you go into your build program, oh, it was just taking a moment to load. The first time you go into your build program, this build program wizard will appear. So I'll talk you through that. So at the end of last year, we introduced this new build program tool, and this automated build program basically reads the labour calculations within your estimate to work out the build phase length. So it's doing some automation of that process. So I'll talk you through how that works now. If you would like to work manually, so i.e. you start with a templated build program and you can change the build phase lengths yourself, then that's absolutely fine as well. I'll quickly show you how you can do that at the end. Okay, so the build program wizard, if you're working with an automated build program, and hopefully you'll recall when we imported our estimates during Tuesday's session, we selected the automated build program option. So when you come into the build program, the first thing it will ask you to do is to set your preferred gang sizes for each of the different build phases and trades. These are the settings that will be used for each new job that you create. So they're like your default gang sizes. So what you want to do is spend a little bit of time just setting this screen up so that you've got the right gang sizes associated with each build phase. The gang size is obviously really important in terms of your build program because it has an impact on the build phase duration. So if you have a larger gang, your build phase duration is going to be shorter. If you have a smaller gang size, then your build phase duration will be longer because the work is going to take longer for one man to carry out than it would do for three, for example. Okay, so if we have a look at, for example, our bricklaying gang. So in the footings, we've got the bricklayer and mate specified as the bricklaying gang. Within masonry shell, we've also got the bricklayer trade there, and again, it's a bricklayer and mate gang. Same for structural openings. So within the different phases, you can have a different gang size selected. So it may be in the masonry shell, you select a 2-in-1 bricklaying gang because you always have a 2-in-1 gang on site during that phase. So as you've seen from the drop-down box, you can select any of the bricklaying gangs that you have in your price book. So we obviously have the 2 bricklayers and a mate set up, so we can select those instead. So you might want to select those across the board. So within the footings, you might want to select the 2-in-1 gang, and within structural opening, 2-in-1 gang, which is probably overkill, but so you can just see how you can select a different gang size. So I'm going to put that back to 1 bricklayer and a mate for now. If the gang that you want to use or you do use is not in this drop-down list, that means it's not in your price book. So what you can do is you can go back to your price book in the library and you can add the bricklaying gang in there, and it will then, once you come back into the job, it will then be available in the list for you to select. Okay, so it's just a case of working your way down the list, selecting the gang sizes that you normally work with. Now you'll see here we've got a few items, plumbing first fix, electrical first fix, and some internal fitting out items which have a user-defined duration next to them. Now the reason the duration is not going to be defined by the software is because these relate to subcontract quotations. So because it's a subcontract quotation, there's no labour calculations that the software can draw on. So you will need to go and define the length of those particular build phases yourself, and we'll come back to that in a moment. So when you're thinking about your preferred gang sizes, you don't need to worry about these user-defined items because we'll specify them for this particular job in a moment. Okay, so once you've set your default gang sizes, you can click next at the bottom. So the next screen, it looks very similar, but we've moved on to defining the gangs we're going to use for this particular job. Okay, the first thing you want to do is look at the build program template options at the top of the screen. So we have 4 build program templates set up. 2 are for a new build and 2 are for an extension or renovation. So we have a typical new build and then we have a COVID secure new build. So the COVID secure options ensure that build phases don't overlap. So the aim of them is to ensure you don't have multiple trades on site at one time. So if keeping trades separate is part of your COVID secure risk assessment, then you can select one of those appropriate, whether it's new build or extension or renovation, COVID secure templates, and that will then ensure there's no overlapping of your build phases. So for now though, let's just select the typical extension stroke renovation template. Okay, so on this screen we can see the costs for each build phase, and as you go down again you can see the gangs which have been selected. You can also see the duration of each of the build phases. Now these durations have been calculated by the software. So if we start by looking at the construction phases, we have some preliminary phases here, but we'll come back to them in a moment. So if we scroll down, so we're looking at foundations to start with. So within the foundations, you can see that deals with the ground worker. And if you hover your cursor over the eye next to ground worker, you'll see the tasks that he's doing. So excavating the trench, removing spoil from site, preparing the bottom of the trench, laying the concrete, and placing cavity fill. So those are the ground worker items. You can see we've got a ground worker and mate specified at a cost of £36 an hour. The total cost is £297, and the duration of the foundations phase is 2 days. So what the software is doing here is it is working out the duration by dividing the build phase cost by the cost per hour, and that gives us this 2-day duration. If, for example, we selected just a ground worker to do this job, so we're going from a gang of 2 to a gang of 1, the cost obviously stays the same, and the duration in this case has stayed the same. It must have, the software does some rounding up, so I'm guessing that the ground worker on his own is taking probably just nearly 2 days, whereas the ground worker and mate was taking probably just over 1 day. If I go for a larger item, so if we go to the masonry shell, you'll see where the bricklaying is concerned, we've got a bricklayer and mate selected. So it's saying it's going to take 7 days for that gang to complete the masonry shell. If we change that gang to just a bricklayer, we can see that the duration increases to 10 days. So he hasn't got the unskilled labourer supporting him, so it's going to take 3 more days. Alternatively, we could increase the gang size to 2 brickies and a mate, and that reduces the duration of the build phase to 4 days. So you can see how by changing your gang sizes, you can have an impact on the duration. So when you're planning your jobs, you may think, right, well, we simply don't have 10 days to do that bit of work. I need to get more men on site for that particular phase. And the software, all it does, as I said before, is it takes the cost for that particular build phase. So the bricklayer costs for the masonry shell are just under £2,000. It divides that by the cost per hour of the gang you've got, and that will give you your duration. So hopefully you're seeing here that you can play around with the gang sizes and see the impact that it has on the duration. And if you need to bring down a build phase duration, you can increase your gang size. So on this screen, you can tweak the gang sizes for this particular job. So if we scroll back to the top, you can see that these preliminary phases, again, because they don't have any labour calculations within them, they're just lump sum costs that you've added into your estimate, that you need to set the duration of these particular phases. So there's an option to use a user-defined duration. That just means you simply type in the duration of this particular phase. So we could set the design phase to say 28 days, just for example. Planning application, maybe that we're going to say that's 8 weeks, so put 56 days in. Building regs, say that's going to be 7 working weeks, 35 days, 7 days on commencement. So I'm just clicking into the box and typing in 7 days for site setup, for example. So where it asks for a user-defined duration, you can just type in the number of days, or you can use the up and down arrows as well, if you're more comfortable doing that. If we scroll down the screen, you'll see there's also user-defined durations associated with the subcontractor quotations that we've added. So I added a plumbing subcontract quotation. So that's set to 1 day. That sounds pretty sensible anyway. Electrical first fix is set to 1 day. Of course, you can change these if you need to. We'll leave them as they are for now. For the plumbing, if you wanted to add in another day for the plumber to return to fit the radiator, I'll show you how you can add that in. Okay, so the third option we have is to set a user-defined rate. So we've got user-defined duration, where you type in the duration, and there's a user-defined rate. So if we go back up the screen to the masonry shell, so at the moment I've got 2 brickies and a mate specified, and the duration is 4 days. Say we wanted to bring in a 3-in-1 gang to complete the work even more quickly. As we don't have this phase in this gang, in the price book, we can click in the drop-down box and we can select the very bottom option. So you could put in a user-defined duration, so you could click on that and select your own duration, or you could put in your own rate. So 3 brickies and a mate is £65 an hour. Sorry, 2 brickies and a mate is £65 an hour. So 3 brickies and a mate would be £90 an hour. So if I click user-defined rate, I can then type in the cost per hour of this particular gang. So I want to use a 3-in-1 gang. They cost £90 an hour. I select user-defined rate, put in their hourly rate, and the software has done that sum of dividing the bricklayer cost by the rate per hour, and it's worked out that this masonry shell is now going to take 3 days if I use a 3-in-1 gang. Okay, so that's just another way that you can change the build phase duration. If you wanted to add that 3-in-1 gang into the price book so that you've got it available to select in the future, you can do it that way as well. So that's just showing you the different options we've got. Okay, so you can select an alternative gang from the drop-down box. I'm going to go back to bricklayer and a mate. You can set in your own duration, or you can type in your own rate, and the software will work out the duration based on the rate that you input there. Okay, so we won't go through every option today, but just so you know the different ways that you can specify the duration from this screen. So if we click next, there's one final screen for us to review. So here we can set the build program start date. So I'm sure you recall when we created the estimate, we set the start date of the project at that point. But as I think I touched on at the time we did it, you're not necessarily going to know the exact date at that point, are you? So when you come into your build program, right, perhaps this job is actually starting 2 weeks later. It's starting on the 17th of May, 2021. We can select an alternative date from the drop down on the top left. You can see a quick preview of your build program. If you're happy with it, then you can click Finish. If you subsequently want to make any changes to the gang sizes, to those rates you've just looked at, then you would click the Calculate New Build Program button on the toolbar at the top of the screen. That will open up the wizard again. And of course it will overwrite whatever you've done on screen. So I'll click no for now. Okay, so just take a moment to familiarise yourself with the build program screen. On the top left, we've got the job start date. So you can change it, the start date from here if you need to. Then we've got a list of all the build phases in the estimate and therefore in the build program. And you can see their start dates and their durations. Across the top, you can see the dates. There's a scroll bar so you can move left to right. There's also some zoom buttons actually on the toolbar at the top. So if you want to zoom out so you can see the whole of the project, you can do that. And you can zoom back in again as needed. The grey lines on the chart show you the weekly increments, so every 7 days. Okay, to select a build phase, you can click on the bar itself. So if I want to select masonry shell, I can click on the masonry shell. The masonry shell row is highlighted in blue, so I can scan across. I can see its start date at a glance, 20th of August, and its duration is set to 7 days. There is a pane on the right hand side. Mine's very small at the moment, so I'm going to drag it. So if you hold your cursor over the border till you see that double-headed arrow, then you can drag that pane over. So on this pane on the right hand side, you can see some key information about that selected phase. So its start date again, its finish date, duration, colour. So if you use particular colours, then you can select an alternative one from there. There's a button here to remove a build phase. Now you can't remove any build phases that have estimated data. So all of these build phases here are based on the estimate, so you can't remove them. Otherwise, the software gets very confused. If you, however, have added your own build phases in, then you can delete those. We'll come back to the links section later. As you can see, there are links between the build phases, which tell the software when a particular phase has to wait for another phase to be finished, and so on. So it allows you to set up some kind of critical path. You can interact with the build program and override the build phase times that have been calculated. Of course, your human understanding of the job and your knowledge of the available workforce and so on can come into play. So if you want to change a build phase start date, if we zoom in, if you hover your cursor over a build phase, so zooming in can help to make sure you're doing this accurately, you can drag that column along, drag the bar along. I move it along by 1 day. So you can drag and drop the bars as you need to. You can also change the duration of a build phase. So if you hover your cursor over the end of a particular build phase, you'll see a different arrow appears. So you'll see arrows pointing in either direction. Once you've got that cursor, if you hold down the left mouse button and drag the build phase, you can change the duration there. So of course here we're overriding the calculations that have been done by the software. If you want to change the sequence of a build phase, you can do that just by using the arrows at the top left of the build program. So say, for example, for some reason you wanted your masonry shell to come after your structural openings. Of course, it doesn't make sense logically, but I'll just show you how you could do it. If you press the down arrow, we've moved the selected build phase down. Do it again, you'll see you can shuffle it along to wherever you want it within the build program. So depending on the construction method you're using, the build program is set up for more of a traditional masonry type build, but if you were doing timber frame, then you might need to change the sequence of things slightly. Okie dokes. So as I mentioned before, some of the build phases have links between them, denoted by the blue arrows. The official name for these links is task dependency. So if you've ever used project management software, that's probably something you're familiar with. So the task dependencies or links set out which build phases have to be completed before another can begin. So with masonry shell, we can see that masonry shell cannot begin until oversight and slab. In fact, let me put my structural openings back in the right place. Put my masonry shell up one. So yeah, masonry shell cannot be completed until cannot start, until oversight and slabbing has been completed. There's no lag time, there's no gap between those particular build phases, but you can add in lags if you need to. Some build phases have got multiple links. So if we have a look at internal fitting out, you can see the links on the right hand side here again. So internal fitting out cannot start until joinery second fix and plastering are complete, as you would expect. If you need a lag time, so if you want to allow a lag between plastering finishing and internal fitting out, you could add in a lag time of however many days. So I've said 5 days. So if I click refresh, so because I've added in that lag time, if you click refresh on the top menu, that will refresh the build program and it will put that gap in there for you. So what the links do, and the reason we have them set up, is if we lengthen or shorten a build phase, any subsequent linked build phases are going to be moved along appropriately. So if we have a look at the footings phase, as you'd imagine, foundations are linked to or dependent on the foundations. The foundations have to be completed before you start laying your footings. So this means if the foundations phase is extended, so if we say that takes a couple more days, then it will shunt along the foundation. The foundations will shunt along the footings, and the changes cascaded along through the rest of the project. So the footings get pushed back, but so does oversight and slabbing, masonry shell, structural openings, and so on. So it's going to set back the whole of your project. Okay, so as I mentioned or touched on, you can add a build phase to the build program if you need to. So as the build program only includes build phases that are linked to estimated data, if you don't have a particular build phase in your estimate, it's not initially going to appear in your build program. However, there may be build phases that you need to be aware of on site that need to be included in your build program that you don't actually have estimated data for. So, for example, we put in our plumbing quotation as a first fix quotation. So we don't actually have plumbing second fix in here at the moment. But as we said, we might want to add plumbing second fix in for when our subcontractor plumber comes to fit the radiator. So if we click add build phase on the menu at the top of the screen, and scroll down, you'll see a list. This list consists of all of the build phases that are in the software, but which don't currently have any estimated data within this job. So towards the bottom, they're listed alphabetically. We've got the plumbing second fix phase. So if we click select, that will then be added to our build program. And it's been plonked right at the top because it doesn't know where to put it at the moment. So we can drag it along. So if I drag it to the right, might need to scroll across on screen. Drag it right over, so that it starts at the same time as, I can see I've got joinery second fix there. If I click refresh, I wondered if it would shunt it down. We're going to have to use the arrows at the top left to move the phase down then into the correct position. So I'll put it underneath joinery second fix. Of course, the duration is far too long at the moment. We just want it to be 1 day, so we can hover our cursor over the end of plumbing second fix till we see that arrow pointing in both directions, and then drag the phase back down to 1 day. We can see the duration on the right hand side. Now, plumbing second fix can't occur until plastering is finished, just like joinery can't start until the plastering has been finished. So we need to add the link to task dependency. Now, if you hover your cursor over the end of a build phase, you will see 2 little circles appear. These allow us to set up links. So if we click on the, if we start with plastering actually, so if you hover your cursor over plastering, you might want to zoom in a little bit to make it a bit easier to locate the dots. So if you hover your cursor over the dot on the end of the plastering phase, hold down your left mouse button and drag down to the start of plumbing second fix. Then that line will be drawn in. So if we click on plumbing second fix now, we can just double check the link on the right hand side. So it's saying the predecessor, so the phase that comes before plumbing second fix is plastering. It needs to have finished before plumbing can start. And again, you could add in a lag time if you needed to. So again, now plumbing second fix is dependent on plastering being finished. So if plastering took a day longer, then plumbing second fix would be shunted along, as would joinery second fix. Okay, so you can see how you can add in build phases that you need within your build program that don't have any estimated data. I'm going to zoom back out so we can get a better view of that. I'm going to reduce the length of my masonry shell again. I think I made it longer, didn't I? Okay. There are some other important build buttons, on the build program tab. So, as I said, calculate new build program if you want to make any changes to the gang sizes or any user-defined durations or rates. You can go back in there and do that. The next button is to use the old style build program templates. So if you decide you want to work that way, you can click the second button. Add build phase, we've just seen, allows us to add in a phase that isn't in the build program already, that doesn't have estimated data. Then we have the remove build phase button. So it's currently greyed out because I have masonry shell selected and I can't remove that particular phase because it's linked to the estimate. But if, however, I click on plumbing second fix, you'll see that it becomes available. So you can remove or delete any build phases that you've added in yourself. If you click this button, it won't immediately delete it. What it does is it will bring up a list of all of the phases that you are allowed to delete, and you can tick the boxes of any that you want to remove. So we'll leave that for now. We'll click cancel. So you saw how the refresh button worked when we added in a lag time and then we clicked refresh. So the build program could update and take that into account. Zoom buttons for zooming in if you're setting up task dependency links and you want to be able to zoom in as you do that, that's helpful. Auto fit will auto fit the chart back onto your screen. Then we've got 2 methods of printing or exporting So once you've finished reviewing your build program, you can print it using the print option, or you can export it as an image. If I just click the print button, the print button prints the build program in our old style. That is because our developers are still working on updating the print function for the new automated build program. So there's just a warning popping up telling you that. And what this means is that the printout has slightly different colours for the build phases. If I put them side by side, you'll be able to see. So that's opened up on my second screen, which is why I've had to drag it over. So the colours are slightly different. So that's a work in progress at our end. If you're happy with the colours, if you're not bothered about that, you can print it from there in the usual way. If you want the build program looking as it does on screen, then you can use the export to image option. So if you click export to image, then you can decide what columns you want to include. Do you want to include the build phase, start date, duration? Which time scale indicators do you want to show? Do you want to show weeks? For example, you'll probably want to show, you can show days as well. That will give you vertical lines showing you the individual days. So if I just click export so you can see the difference. So you can see a couple of image files that I have previously exported. They appear. They will be saved automatically in the folder you've set up to save your jobs in, or wherever. I should clarify that wherever you've last saved your job in EstimatorXpress, you can save that image file there. And it's going to open it up for us. So you can see that's literally just like a screenshot of the build program from the software. Okay, so that's two different ways of outputting the build program depending on how you want it to appear. So that's the introduction to the build program. A couple of things to make you aware of before we leave this section. The build program gives all of the date information to any of the reports that make use of dates. So reports like the cash flow report, profit forecast, order schedules, any reports that have date fields in them, they will use the start and end dates of the build phases from your build program to construct the data. So something like a cash flow or profit forecast report is going to be meaningless unless your build program is set up before you use it. Same for order schedules, because it's based on if your masonry shell commences on the 23rd of August, then it's going to calculate your brick delivery times a couple of weeks before that, or order date a couple of weeks before that, and so on. So make sure your build program is set up accurately before you use any of those reports that make use of dates. So the build program takes its labour times from the estimate. Of course, it's always good practice to review those calculated build phase lengths, apply your knowledge of the job and any complexities to make sure that you come up with a realistic build schedule for the job. Okay, so we're going to move on to the outputs section now. So if you can click outputs on the navigator on the left, so you can navigate directly to the different sections of the outputs, or if you click on the outputs heading itself, then you'll see a list of the different outputs that we've got. So as I touched on before, we've got the different written documents, then we've got graphical reports, so that's bar charts and pie charts and line graphs that we've got for these various types of information, and then we've got data reports. The data reports is pretty vast. These reports in here contain massive amounts of really useful data about your estimate, and we really believe that if you can use these reports well, it will help you manage your business more efficiently and more profitably. So we're going to have a look at several of the reports, and I'm going to talk about how you might use them. I'd strongly recommend that when you have half an hour, you make use of just the time to just open up the reports and have a look at them and get an understanding of the data that's available, and maybe make a note of the ones that you think will be useful, particularly useful to you. So we're going to start near the top, and we're going to open up first of all the sales price including overhead and profit report. So next to sales price including profit, overhead and profit, click open. Once you're within a report, the list of data reports will open up on the navigator on the left hand side, so you can move between the reports using the navigator, so you don't have to go back to the screen you were on before. Okay, so before we look at this specific report, just to highlight the options that you've got on the toolbar at the top. So there's a copy option. You can copy the current report, give it a new name. That's quite handy if you want to create a similar report, but you want to maybe move some of the columns around, and I'll show you how you can edit the reports shortly. There's a delete button. This will delete the report from this current job, so it only deletes it from this job, it doesn't delete it from the software altogether. Autofit. Autofit does what it does in Excel. It fits the text or the data within the cells, so sometimes when you open up a report you'll see that you can't see the full contents of the cell, so you can click autofit and the column will be expanded. The field list is a panel or a pane on the right hand side. You can switch that on or off. If you have it switched on, and I will show you how you can use the field list in a short while. So the field list allows us to put different categories of data, different fields onto the report. So I'll show you how you can use that to manipulate your reports. Then we have a number of options for whether we want to show column and row grand totals and column and row totals. So they're all ticked on at the moment. Usually you want them switched on, but sometimes it can make a report, a more complex report, a bit too a bit messy, so you might want to switch them off, but I'd leave them switched on for now. There are options to hide any items with a zero quantity or a zero cost. So sometimes you'll open a report and it will have zeros in. I think with that option that we went to at the very start, where we told the software not to import zero costs and quantities, I think we've actually circumnavigated that anyway. So then we've got print and export options, so you can print any of the reports, you can export them, so you can export them to Excel if you want to be able to play around with the report in Excel. You can export the reports as a PDF if you want to email them to somebody, and so on. You'll see the full list of different file types there. You can save a report, so if you have created your own report and you want to save it to the library so that you can use it in other jobs, then that's the button you want. And then one of my favourite buttons is the Restore Report button. So if you do some tinkering around with a report, you add some columns in, but then you decide you've got in a bit of a mess with it and you just want to bring it back to its original format, click the Restore Report button. So the Restore Report button is your license to have a play around and not worry about messing anything up, because you can always go back to how the report started. Okay, so now onto this particular report. This is the sales price including profit report, as we can see from the title at the top. It gives you a very simple breakdown of costs, wastage, profit and overhead, and the total price including profit and overhead for each build phase. So have a quick look at that report. And you can see the grand totals at the bottom. And once you're happy with what that does, we can move on to the next report. As I said, we can use the navigator on the left hand side to do that. So you'll see underneath the report we're currently in, we've got a series of different trade cost reports. So what I'd like us to do is open the plastering costs. All of these different trade-specific cost reports are set out in exactly the same format, but they just focus on one particular trade. So if you need to look at the costs for one particular trade, then you can use one of these reports. So here you can see the build phases associated with a particular trade, a description of the resources being used and what they're being used for. And then if we scroll across to the right, we can see the costs for each task. So again, we can see the costs excluding wastage. We can see wastage costs where relevant, so they're not relevant to the plasterer's time, but they are relevant to the materials. And then we can see the total cost, including wastage. So we have a very similar report for the decorators, plumbers, roof tilers, and so on. So the next report I'd like us to look at, another fairly simple one, is costs by resource. So it's about 15 lines down or so, costs by resource. We click on that on the navigator. This report's about as simple as it gets. It shows your costs broken down by the various resource types. So you can see the 5 different resource types, and you can see again the costs excluding wastage, wastage costs, where they're relevant, and total costs. So you can see where all that money's going. Okay, so there are a few fairly simple reports that we've got at the top. But let's have a look at some of the really important ones. So the next report down we've got is the cash flow report. The cash flow report shows your outgoings for the job. So this is one of the reports which is date-based, so it requires you to have a reasonably accurate bill program set up prior to using this report. So the cash flow report will give you a pretty good idea of when you need cash in from your client to cover your outgoings. So you can use it to inform your requests for payments, your stage payments, however you operate. Okay. So you can see the payment due date here. As I said, that's the approximate date for when you need money in from the client so that you can cover material and labour outgoings. So you'll see you've got a column showing the outgoings on those particular dates. So this one just shows outgoing on each date, and the right hand column shows the cumulative outgoings. So you can see that building up over the duration of the job. So you could quickly see at a glance if you've only asked your client for £8,000 by the start of September, that you're actually going to be a bit out of pocket there. So you can use a cash flow to help you set your payment schedule. So that's the cash flow report. A couple of lines down, you might need to scroll down on your navigator. We've got the profit forecast report, so click on that to open it up. The profit forecast, as you'd imagine, it shows the profit that you're going to earn during this particular job, and it also shows the cumulative profit building up as well. The profit forecast reports use profit figures set in the job settings. So you may remember when we created the job, we had the opportunity to set the profit markup at that point, but also from within the job, I'll show you this shortly, you can review and change your profit margins or markup from within the job. Apologies for the length of time it's taken for these reports to open. Seems to be getting slower each time. Just to say, bit of a tip, with EstimatorXpress Enterprise Edition, you can group together more than one estimate. So that allows you to combine data from multiple jobs. And a really good way of using that tool is to link all of the estimates from your jobs for the next 6 months, say, or the next 12 months. And you can then create a combined profit forecast report. And that will act as an annual profit forecast or 6-month profit forecast for your business. So that can be really helpful for managing the profit across the business rather than just looking at one specific job. Okay, but of course in this case we're just looking at this job, so we can see the payment due dates, the profit coming in, and then the cumulative profit on the right hand side. Okay, the next report I wanted to show you is the labour time schedule, which is 3 lines down. So the labour time schedule report shows you the labour times that we've calculated for the build phases. So that's quite handy in terms of your build program. You might want to review the labour time schedule side by side with your build program. Okay, so as you can see here, the labour time schedule gives you an indication of how long each trade is going to take on each build phase, and that works in hours. So if you wanted to work out your days, you would divide the figures you've got there by 8. Okay, so if we jump on to the quotation inquiry, so you need to scroll down perhaps on the navigator. Right near the bottom, we've got the quotation inquiry. The reason I want to send you this, show you this rather, is that it's quite useful for exporting and sending to your merchant. So say you wanted to send a quotation inquiry to an aggregates merchant, for example. I'll show you how you can edit this report to create an aggregate specific quotation inquiry. Now, all of the reports are editable. That means you can remove columns or fields of data, and you can add columns or fields of data. You can change the position of the columns as well, which will display the information in a different format. So I'll just talk you through some of the ways you can edit. Okay, so this is the quotation inquiry. So you could send this off to your merchant. It lists the quantities of the resources you need. But as I said, you might want to tailor it. So we'll just go through the process of setting this up for an aggregate merchant, for example. So as you can see, the report's organised into columns. The first column shows resource types. So if you hover your cursor over resource type, you'll see a filter icon appears. So these filters work exactly the same as they do in the price book, if you remember filtering the price book. So click on the funnel icon, the filter icon, on the resource type column, and you'll see a list of all of the different resource types appears. So this allows you to filter out the particular resource types you want to see. So perhaps we want to see aggregates and blocks and concrete. So let's say it's a heavy side merchant that we want to get some decent deals off. So if we click aggregates, blocks, scroll down a bit, concrete products. Okay, so we've got a bit of data in there to illustrate what we're doing anyway. Then if we click elsewhere on the report to get rid of that filter menu there, so you can now see a list of those aggregates, heavy side type resources, materials that we need, and the quantities that we require. So all we've done there is literally filter the report to show specific report types. We could then export this as an Excel file or a CSV file, attach it to an email, and send it to a merchant to review. We could also, if we wanted to make some changes to it, we could export it as an Excel file, an Excel workbook. So if I just save that quickly, show you what that would look like. So that's opened up on my second screen. So if I just expand these columns, so you can see we've got all that data in an Excel spreadsheet now. So it may be that you don't want to show your merchant resource quantity excluding wastage and then the wastage field. You might want to just delete those two fields and change this to total resource quantity, total resource. In fact, we could just call it total quantity required, so you can simplify the language on it. So that shows you the units you need. You might even want to go down there and do some rounding up. You can look at the different items, round up, round down as you need to, and so on. So you can do a bit of editing in Excel if that's helpful to you. So if we just open up one last report, I'm going to open up the materials used report, which is above the one we've just opened. So materials used lists your required materials by build phase. So we're going to open up this report and look at some of the ways that we can change a report to suit our particular needs. While I'm just waiting for it to open, just a few words about how you might want to use this particular report. So we hear that the builders can visit their merchant a few times a week. They might be at their merchant 3 or 4 times a week. And obviously each time you're doing that, it's taking up time. There are, of course, circumstances where you do need to go to the merchant, but if you can plan your material orders really effectively, you can significantly reduce the amount of time that you're spending at the merchant, and then you can be using that time on tasks that are going to make you more money, finding clients, estimating, selling, project management, or maybe just enjoying life, spending a bit more time with the kids, and so on. So this materials used report can be used to create a delivery schedule, so a material delivery schedule that you can send off to your merchant. And then that means if you have space available, you can have all the materials delivered to your site as per the schedule so that they're available when you need them, and you don't have to chase your merchant or drive to the merchant and make several ad hoc collections of various items. I was also I was reading an article that was saying that smaller builders are being more affected by the material shortages and supply chain issues at the moment because they're buying smaller quantities. They're last, they're bottom of the chain when it comes to getting hold of materials. So it sounds like it's more important than ever to be really organised about ordering your materials ahead of time, because you're not going to be able to just pick up the phone and order things for the next day because they're not necessarily going to be available. So let's see how we can use this materials used report to create that delivery schedule for you. So as we saw before, all of the reports have different column headings. We can drag those off the report, or we can drag other column headings on. So on the field list on the right hand side, you'll see we've got a list of other fields which we can add to the report. So we've got some folders at the top, job related fields. The next one, which is really important and really useful, is the resource related fields. So you'll see there's so many different fields that you can apply to the report as you need to. So the field that we're going to add now is the date required field. So it's just loosely in the list underneath. They're all ordered alphabetically, so we've got date required there. So if you want to bring that particular field onto your report, you click and hold down your left mouse button and drag it onto the report. If you put it at the top of the report where the column headings are, some blue arrows will appear showing you where the field will be added. So let's say we want to place it to the left of the build phase, so it's going to go on the very left of the report. So once you've got those blue arrows appearing in the correct position, you can release the left mouse button and that date required column is added to the report. So all of these resources are now listed by the date that they're required on site. So you might say we don't actually need the build phase on our material delivery schedule, so we can remove this particular column. So if you hold your cursor over the build phase column heading, hold down the left mouse button, you can drag it up to the top of the screen and you'll see that red icon with a cross in appears. Once you see that icon, release the mouse button and that build phase column will be removed. It's not gone for good. If you have a look at the field list, you'll see that build phase has now appeared in there, so you can drag it back on if you needed to. So you never lose the fields, you're just removing them from the report and they then appear back in the field list. So the materials are now grouped by the date that they're required rather than by build phase. So we can drag other headings from the field list and place them on the report. So if we have a look in the resource folder, so click on the arrow next to the resource folder to expand it. And if we scroll down, there is a field called resource type. So again, they're listed alphabetically. If you can find resource type, we can drag that onto the report in different places to manipulate the data. If I pop it between date required and resource description, release the left mouse button when you want to let go of it. The report now shows the date that the items are required, the resource type, and then the resource description. If you wanted to move that particular column heading, you can just hold down your left mouse button and move it to a different location. So you see that just displays the data slightly differently. I think it makes more sense in this case to have it before the resource description. Okay, so as before, as I showed you with the quotation inquiry, you can then export this report as a CSV file or as an Excel file. You can remove items, particular items, if you're not going to get them from this particular merchant. You can remove any rows. Again, you might not want to show all the different quantity fields. You might just want to show the total quantities. This report currently shows costs, so again, you might not want to show costs in your order schedule, so you can remove those. If you can set up order schedules in this way, then of course it's not going to avoid all visits to the merchant, but by planning your order schedule in this way, then it will reduce the number of times that you have to go there and hopefully make better use of your time. One other thing to note is that you might have noticed at the very top, the type of resource heading has a filter on it. You can see the filter icons there showing us that we've got a filter applied. So if you click on that filter icon, the funnel icon, you'll see that this report is currently set up to just show materials, as you'd expect, because it's a materials used schedule that we have converted to a delivery schedule. But you can use the filters at the very top of the screen to change the nature of a report altogether. So you could select labour instead, remove materials, and then of course you've created a completely different report. This is a labour used report now, so you could save that to the library if you wanted. Okay, so the main ways that you can edit a report are to add fields from the field list, remove fields by dragging them up to the top, applying filters by hovering your cursor over a column heading, clicking on the filter icon, or by filtering the any of the columns right at the top of the screen. As I said at the very start, when you've changed a report, there might be times that you want to restore it to its original format. If that's the case, then you can click the Restore Report button. If you're really happy with it and you want to keep it, of course, click Save Report. So, as I said, if you have got some time later on to have a browse through the various reports and have a play around with editing them, so just to build your confidence doing so, then that would be a really good use of your time. Okay, so just before I move on to the quote, I'm just going to dip into the graphical reports. So scrolling up on the navigator, above the data reports, we've got the graphs. Click on graphs to open it. As I said before, the graphs are they're more presentation style reports, so bar charts, graphs, pie charts and line graphs. They might be useful to you if you need to make a presentation of your data to your boss, to shareholders, to the bank manager. So again, I suggest you just have a look at some of them. So if we have a look at the cash flow, for example. You might find information in there displayed in the way you want, and you can interact with them. So if you hover your cursor over points on a line graph, it will show you the cost at that point, so the current date and the cumulative costs. And if we go back to graphs, you'll see that the kind of things we've got in there. So we've got sales price cash flow, cost cash flow. We've got breakdowns of costs by estimating calculator. So if you want to see the costs associated with each estimating calculator, we can see the costs by the type of report, costs by trade, sales price by build phase. If we have a look at one of these graphs, so you can see what the price to the customer is by build phase. If you hover your cursor over one of the segments, mine is appearing on my second screen for some reason, but you can see the cost for each particular build phase. You can play around with these charts as well. You can change the chart type. You can change it to a bar chart if you want, or change it to a 3D pie chart, which looks quite nice. You can, if you are going to print them out and use them, you can also change the color scheme on them using the palette options. Okay, and then of course you can print them and export them. Okay, so that's my quick intro to the various reports we've got. And the final section is all about the customer quotation. So I'll move on to that because that's obviously a very important feature of the software. So this is the very final section of the final module. So well done, you're on the home straight. Before you begin creating your quote, you will just want to check that you've got your customer details set up correctly. So if you scroll down the navigator and open up the job settings, you'll see in there the client contact details and the overhead profit and markup. So these are the two things you want to check before you create your quote. So if we go into client contact details, just make sure your client's name and address are typed in correctly. You don't want any typos in there, of course. The other thing you want to check are your overhead profit and inflation rates, because of course these will be applied to your quote. Your inflation will be applied if you select that option, so this is where you make sure those rates are set correctly for this job. Once you've done those two things, we're going to go back to the output section. So I'm going to click on the arrow to expand outputs, and then I'm going to click on quote for main estimate. So click on quote for the main estimate, and it will take a moment to create this because it's drawing all the data from your estimate and putting it together to create a beautifully presented customer quotation. Okay, so some important things to note about editing the customer quotation. If we have a look on the navigator on the left-hand side, you'll see that we're currently looking at the quote for main estimate. This is a preview of the entire document that we're looking at the moment. So we can scroll right the way through it if we want to. Underneath this complete preview, we then have the various sections of the quote, and we can click into these to edit the various different sections. Okay, so we've got the header and footer, we've got the cover page, we've got the introductory letter, we've got the summary. So if you want to edit one of those particular sections, you need to click on it on the navigator. When you click on it on the navigator, a number of different settings for that particular section will appear on the pane on the right hand side. Okay. So if we go back to, let's have a look at we'll go back to the quote for main estimate to the top level for now. So within the quote, there are main settings. So these are the settings which affect the whole of the quote. So it's your overall quote settings. So we'll start by looking at those in a moment. Depending on the section you're in, you will also see an additional tab with settings for the particular section that you're looking at. So at the moment we're looking at the cover page, and we can see cover page settings as well. So those are specific to this particular page. So if we go back to the main settings tab, using the settings panel on the right hand side, we'll work our way down these options just so that you get an understanding of what it is the different options do. So the first thing we can think about is what kind of quote we want to put together. Do we want to organise the quote by build phase, by estimating calculator, or by location? So the build phase option will create a traditional style customer quote, breaking down the job into build phases. So this is the quote that the vast majority of our builders use for the vast majority of their work. There are two other options though. The estimating calculator option will break the estimate down into estimating calculator. So rather than looking at masonry shell, for example, it will be broken down into brick and block cavity walls, and then the windows will be in a separate section and the bifold doors will be in a separate section, and so on. It can be useful when you're doing more specific work, but as I say, the build phase option is the one that most of our builders use. The third option allows you to create a quote based on each of the location of the different sections of the estimate. That can be useful for renovation work, or if you're doing work in different areas of a particular project. So say you're doing a garage conversion and you're doing some internal renovation of a house and you're doing some landscaping in the garden. For each of the parts of the estimate within the estimating calculator, you can assign that particular part of the estimating calculator to the garage, to the garden, or to the house. And if you want to divide things out that way, then you can use the location option. But for today, we're going to stick with the build phase option. The next option is the data filter. So it sounds a bit complicated, but it's literally which resource types do you want to include in your quote. So if you were doing a labour only quote, you could unselect everything except labour. And then only labour would be used within the quote, so it wouldn't include any material calculations. any plant or anything else. For the vast majority of quotes, you're going to want to select all, so which is how it's set automatically at the start. Okay, the next section allows you to tick which options you want to include in your quote. So you might want the cover page, cover letter. You might not want to include terms and conditions, for example, so you can untick that box if you've got a separate document that you're going to use. I've got assumptions and omissions and provisional sums unticked. That's because I haven't got any in this particular estimate, but you can have them switched on or off as you want. Okay, so inflation I've talked to you about before in terms of setting up your inflation rate, but this is the important setting that decides whether inflation is applied to your quote or not. So if you untick that box, inflation will not be included in your quote. If you tick this box, it will be included at the rate set out in your job settings. So mine's set out to apply 5% from 12 weeks. Okay, so this is where you decide whether it's actually applied to this quote. You can set your VAT settings here. So this can be set as a percentage as it is currently, or as a fixed amount, or as input only. So by default, the EstimatorXpress will add 20% on to your quote for VAT. This figure can be changed to a different percentage if VAT rates were to change, for example, or if you're doing a different classification of building work, which has a different VAT rate. So if you're doing new build or listed buildings. If you as a company are not VAT registered, then you need to select the input only option. So the input only option will add VAT onto the resources you pay for, such as materials, and it will apply VAT on any VAT registered subcontract companies that you're using. But with the input only option for VAT, EstimatorXpress will not apply VAT to the quote as a whole. So it won't add 20% VAT onto the quote here. And that's because if you're a non-VAT registered company, the VAT becomes an actual cost to your business. It's not reclaimable. So if you're not VAT registered, then you need to select input only. If you are VAT registered, then you probably want to set it to percentage and leave it set to 20%. Okay, so the bottom of the main settings here, we've got the font style settings. So if you've got a particular font your company uses, or you want to change the font size and so on, so you can set the font for the normal text for each of these different elements of font within the document. So I won't go through it all step by step with you now, but if that's something you want to edit, then that's where you can do it from. Okay, so on the navigator on the left, I'm now going to move down to the header and footer. So this allows you to add in any text or images that you want. So you can choose what you want to insert in the left, centre and right of the header, and again the left, centre and right of the footer of your document. Sometimes you might want to save any header or footer as an image, and you can bring it in as one piece. So if you want to do that, if you've got a header set up already, you can tick include banner, and you can browse your computer, find that image document and insert it, and then use the offset measurement here to control how far from the edge of the page it is. So you can you can bring in an image, or you can use these drop-down boxes to select particular items of information that you want to include. So you might want to put, for example, the job name in there and the date the job was created, and it's saying the site address, so that's okay. Whenever you make a change to any of the settings, you need to click the Apply Changes button on the bottom right. So you won't see the changes on the preview until you click Apply. Okay, so you can decide which text fields you want to insert in there, or as I said, you can insert an image. Okay, so moving down into the next section, it's the cover page. So the cover page has the name of the job, or the description of the job, I should say, the client's name and the site address. These are determined by these references or keywords in the box on the right hand side. So if you wanted to change this, so for example you wanted to put rear lean-to extension, so that the lean-to extension is the reference description keyword there, but I've added an extra word. If I click Apply Changes, then that appears on the cover page. You might want to delete this altogether and just type in your own wording for the cover page. That's fine, you can just type into that box. If you want to add your own keywords in, for example, if we wanted to put a telephone number in there, then you can look down the list of keywords that are available. So click in the box where you want to put the keyword, or maybe let's say I want to put the date in, put a line break in there as well. Click Apply Changes, and then it's added today's date in there. So whatever fields you want to put on your cover sheet, you can. And then something I've already set up on my software is I have inserted my company logo. So if you want to do that, tick the Include Logo tick box at the bottom. Browse your computer for your logo. Let's say I'm going to use a different logo. So find it on your computer, click Open. Then you might just want to consider the size. So that's the width, so 80mm. The horizontal alignment, do you want it in the middle or do you want it left or right? The vertical alignment, do you want it at the top, middle or bottom? So I've selected middle, but you could put it at the top. The padding is how far it is from the side of the page, so you might want to think about how far it needs to be so it looks right. So I've got it set to 3 centimeters. Click Apply Changes as before. So now my logo is appearing at the top. It is 80mm across, and it's 30mm from the top of the screen there. Okay, so that's how you can insert your company logo. If you move on to the next section, which is the letter. So the letter, as with the cover page, the text for it is in this box on the right hand side. So EstimatorXpress is set up with a number of paragraph, we call it paragraph wording, so the letter wording. You can add in your own letter. So if you've got letters set up that you already use, what you'd want to do is open it up in the Word document, copy and paste it into this box here. So if you want to copy and paste, you can use the shortcut keys on your keyboard, Ctrl+C to copy from the Word document, then click into here. So if we're pasting over here, and then you can press, do it up to there, you can press Ctrl and V to paste your letter into there. I would leave these bits at the top with the references in, dear client name, reference number, reference name. In fact, not reference number, I'm going to delete reference number out. I don't think that's very meaningful to the client. So I'm going to delete the reference number. They don't need to know it's job number 12. Click Apply Changes. So the client's name and the job reference are appearing. Obviously that makes more sense if you've used like a job address for the description. of the job name. So you've got the list of keywords here that you can insert into your letter so that you don't have to type them out every time. If you use those references, the software will just pull in the correct information. So as I said, copy and paste in your own letter if you've got some set up, or you can just adapt the letter here as you want to. Once you've set up a particular letter, it may be that you want to save it in the library so that you can use it again in the future. If that's the case, you can click the Save button at the top. You can either choose to overwrite the existing letter templates in there, or you can add in a new paragraph name, which is probably the safer way to do it. So I'm going to call this Concord, because that's my company name, extension template, for example. Then click OK. Are you sure you want to save this text? Yep. So then I'll need to import it. So it's saved to the library, and then if I click import, I can then bring in my particular paragraph to use. So next time you create a job, you can just click that import button and bring in your letter template, so it'll be there set up. There's also an option to include a company letterhead. So tick that box, again browse your computer and bring it in. The letterhead setting is best done if you've got the letterheads saved as a single page size image. If you've got any issues with that, give the tech support guys a call and they'll talk you through it. Okay, so then we come on to, we'll skip over assumptions and omissions because basically that's just where the software brings in any assumptions and omissions that you've added into your estimate. So there's nothing to show at the moment. Also the summary section is a breakdown of costs by build phase. There aren't really many settings there, but I'll just show you them quickly actually. So you can either decide whether or not you want to show the build phase totals. So if you remove the build phase totals, it is a very short summary of costs for the project. There's also an option to show the summary after the breakdown. So some people like to have the cost summary towards the top of their quote, some people like to have it lower down. So if you tick show summary after breakdown, that will move the summary down the document. So even though you can't see it here, when you print the document out, it will be after the breakdown of the build phases. Okay, so on to breakdown. So the breakdown is obviously the important part of your quotation. So if we scroll down, when we clicked on breakdown, we can see all of the build phases. If we click on a particular build phase, say masonry shell, we'll just look at that specific build phase. So we've still got the main settings tab available there if you want to change any of the overall quote settings, but we've then got the build phases settings, so that controls the breakdown of our quote. So let's just talk through the build phase settings. So you can decide whether you want to include an introductory paragraph or not. So that's the paragraph that comes at the start of each build phase. You can decide whether you want to include page breaks. So do you want to start each new build phase on a new page? If you do, just tick that box. You can then decide whether you want to include these build phase diagrams. So we'd recommend that if it's a quote for a domestic client, then leave those images in there. Number one, it helps them understand what part of the job this section relates to. Secondly, and perhaps just as importantly, the images are going to help the client create that emotional connection with the build. So for a domestic client, that's quite important for them to feel that connection with their impending building work. It might sound a bit silly and a bit highbrow, but it's the same psychology as why, you know, if you walk into a car showroom, the salesman's going to get you sat in the car as soon as possible. It helps them create that attachment. So it's a subtle but quite valuable part of the sales process. So we suggest you leave those images in. If you've got your own images, you can actually use them. So for masonry shell, we've got our own cavity brick wall image at the moment, but you could browse and select your own image if you've got alternatives you want to use. So I've clicked onto the masonry shell tab. That allows me to control what I'm showing within this specific build phase. So you can get down to that level of detail if you want to. But if we just go back to build phases for now. So we've got images switched on at the moment. We've got description, showing the description of the phase. Total build phase cost. So do you want to show the total cost of this build phase at the bottom here, or you can switch it off if you're happy with it just showing in the summary. If we scroll down, build phases itemizes which build phases are shown in the quote. So occasionally there will be a build phase with a very small cost that you don't want to set out, you don't want to itemize separately. So if, for example, I've got internal fitting out and internal decoration switched off. I must have done that previously. So yeah, if, for example, you didn't want to show commencement and site setup as its own section in the quote, you can untick those. And then when you click apply changes, any unticked items will be grouped together in the additional charges section. So that's not a good example I've given you there, but occasionally there might be costs that you don't want to itemize individually. You just can put them together in the additional charges section. So obviously the costs will still be included in the quote, but you're just not spelling it out line by line, basically. Okay, so last few settings in here, you can get into quite a lot of detail here with what you're showing exactly. But one really important item here is the resource output and this option to show quantities. So this quote at the moment is not showing resource quantities. It's saying for bricks above DPC, I'm using facing bricks, but it's not showing how many of them. If we tick show quantity and click apply changes, I'm going to go back to the masonry shell. So you can now show the quantities of the main materials that are being used. Now we know that a lot of builders are quite fearful about showing their quantities, that perhaps they're worried that their client will show their quote to someone else and that will make it easier for their competition to be putting a quote together. But we feel it really strengthens the quality of your quote. It shows that you haven't just plucked the figures out of the air, as some builders will do. You shouldn't be scared of supplying a good quote that shows it's been carefully estimated. If you are worried about your quote being passed on, then what you can do is you can do 2 copies of the quote. You can print it once with quantities, once without, when you meet with a client, or if you're showing it to them perhaps over a Zoom meeting or whatever, you can talk through the quantities with them then, but then the copy that you leave with them or you email over to them perhaps doesn't need to have quantities on there if that's something that you're concerned about. But again, it shows the quality and the detail in your quote, and that it's not just a back of an envelope quote that you've put together for them. Okay, so if I just go back to build phases. So I'll let you just explore in your own time really. You'll see subtotals here allow you to decide whether you want to show subtotals for each resource type. So for example, you might want to show material quantities within each build phase. Sorry, did I say quantities? Material costs. If there we go. So here you'll see we've now got a row saying material costs excluding VAT. So you can elect to show the subtotals for each build phases for materials, labour and so on. Okay, so that's a quick introduction to all the build phase settings. The last couple of sections in the quote, if I switch my terms and conditions back on actually so I can show you this properly. The final two sections of the quote are the acceptance forms. So the acceptance forms, there will be 2 of those printed out. Just allows the customer to sign and you guys to sign. Of course, it won't say HPXL, it will say your company name there to say that you both agree to the work going ahead. For some reason, I can't see my terms and conditions. I seem to have lost them. There's also, I'm sure you can see on your end if you haven't switched them off, there's a terms and conditions page. This is basically a blank page where you can either copy and paste in to the text box in the same way there's a text box on the right hand side. You can copy and paste in your company terms and conditions if you want to use them. Terms and conditions is just a serving suggestion though. You can use that final page for anything that you'd like to put at the end of your customer quotation. So once you've finished setting up your quote and you're happy with it, you might want to click this Save to Library button on the toolbar at the top. This allows you to save your quote settings to the library, and then you can, when you create other jobs, or if you've got jobs you've already created, in fact, you can click the Import from the Library button. It will bring in those quote settings. So if you've got it set up to show quantities, you've maybe put your own build phase descriptions in, you've set up your company letterhead, you've adapted the introductory letter, you've put your company logo in, so it's all looking how you want it to look. Click Save to the Library, save it. Any subsequent jobs will automatically have those quote settings. Any jobs you've already worked on, if you click the Import from Library button, you can bring those quote settings and apply them to that particular estimate, so you don't have to set up all of these things each and every time you create a quote. Okay, so once you've got the quote as you want it, don't forget to save your settings to the library. Save yourself a load of effort. So once you're happy with it, of course, you can then print or export the document. So you can see you can print it, you can save it as a Word document, you can save it as a PDF, or we have a number of other file types that you can export it as if they're useful to you. So once you've exported it as a PDF or whatever, then you can attach it to a document, attach it to an email, and get it sent off to your client. And then, yeah, then it's time for crossing fingers and hoping you get a positive response. So there is a really detailed video on the website that will talk you through setting up your customer quote. So if I just refer you back to the Help tab, you can click Help Videos. That will take you directly to the EstimatorXpress help on the web. So this has our how-to videos page. So within the EstimatorXpress 2019 and 2020 videos, these are all the videos that are relevant. There's quite a long list of videos there, but you'll see actually from here you can see one called Opening and Editing the Customer Quote. If you click on that, it will open this video that talks you through all of those company settings. So it shows you how to insert your company logo, how to edit the wording, and so on. So if you need to refer back to that, that's actually goes through in more detail than we've been able to do today. I apologise, you'll have to listen to a bit more of my voice if you do decide to watch that. But yeah, don't forget those videos are there. So if you're ever a bit stuck, there's some really helpful videos on estimating different types of jobs, so renovations and lofts in EstimatorXpress, and videos on the reports if you want to go back over there, or if you're wanting to edit your material prices. So they're a bit more specific, not as long as the training modules that you've done, but if you want to just dip into certain skills, they can be really helpful. Okay, so that is everything I wanted to cover during module 4. So thank you ever so much for your time and your dedication. Okay, so I have just gone to the help homepage, which is, if you type in help.hpexcel.co.uk, that will bring you here. This has got our contact details on here, so the tech support number and opening times, the tech support email address. Don't think if you email us you're not going to get a reply for a week. Tom checks the email throughout the day, so you should get a reply within the day. So if it's easier to email, then please do. Also, of course, you've seen the chat box here popping up, so you can ask a query via chat if that's easier for you as well. So do get in touch if you have any queries or need any help with anything going forward. So good luck, guys, with your estimating, with your taking off in the future. Keep in touch. Get in touch with the tech support team if you do need help with anything. We'd love to hear how you're getting on. So thanks again, guys. Take care, and get in touch with us if there's anything we can do to help you with. All right. Thanks a lot then. Bye.